And we're back for another episode of Startup Hustle, a podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. If you want to start, own, or build a business, then you're in the right place. We bring you the real truth about what it's like to take something from concept to launch. From growth, innovation, experience, failing, or winning big, we've got you covered. So let's get down to business with another episode of Startup Hustle, brought to you by Fullscale.io. And we're back. Another episode of Startup Hustle. Matt DeCourcy here to have another conversation I'm hoping helps your business grow. With that, it's time for the thrilling conclusion of our 4-part e-commerce series sponsored by Clarinity. Now, I should let you know, once again, the sponsor of this series was Clarinity. Now, Clarinity solves the most complex problems in e-commerce through cloud-based inventory management and operations optimization. Now, hopefully you've been listening to all 4 parts of this and know what some of that means. If you don't, scroll down, click the link in the show notes, because that's what they do. They help you solve problems like that. Now, if you need to get a handle on your company's growth, or you need to, you really should give Clarinity a shot. They're there to help you solve problems, and every business, every startup has problems. So check out the link in the show notes, click that. Now, I did mention that this is part 4 of a 4-part series about e-commerce. We started with the history and evolution of e-commerce. We talked about accounting in e-commerce. And yes, that is different than normal, air quotes around this, accounting. Talked about organizing your e-commerce inventory. And today we will be talking about leadership skills that are essential for e-commerce teams, especially businesses that want to get a hold on it. Now, as you guys know, we always bring in a subject matter expert when and where we can. And with me today, I've got Greg Moss. Greg is the Chief of Innovation and Engagement Officer for the City of Westminster in Colorado, up there somewhere a mile high. Are you up there, Greg?
We are a little bit above mile high for many reasons. Altitude and other products that we happen to sell very, very, very well up here.
Well, and just for purposes of clarification, where is Westminster?
Westminster is situated almost halfway exactly between Denver and Boulder. We are a 120-plus-year-old community that has grown fairly significantly over the last 20, 25 years or so. And now we have a robust economy that includes a lot of tech startups and e-commerce as well.
Yeah, and for those of you that aren't listening or haven't listened before, if you found us, well, welcome to Startup Hustle, and also Greg, welcome to Startup Hustle. Now, Denver and Boulder are hotspots for startup activity. Now, I'm in Kansas City, and Kansas City has a very robust scene, but there's so much going on in this area that we often refer to as flyover country. And Denver and Austin are kind of the leaders in the mid-market sized cities. And really congrats to everything you guys are doing up there. It's impressive, and we're trying to keep up here in KC. So. But before we get into some of the leadership skills, for e-commerce teams and businesses, let's start with a little bit of your backstory and what brought you to this innovation leadership role in the city of Westminster. Well,
Matt, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's great to meet you. And your story is fascinating too. Mine is very circuitous, and I did not start in government. Did not believe that I would end up in a government role such as I am. I actually have a very sordid past that not only includes being an entrepreneur, a little stint in e-commerce, specifically on science toys that were very successful back in the mid-'90s, early 2000s, to working in government back at the state level in economic development and entrepreneurship, and also a large stint in broadcast journalism. I was a television anchor here at the NBC affiliate for almost 2 decades. Have landed back in this role of being an innovation officer, which affords me the opportunity to do a lot of different things. But what I'm most excited about and talk to your audience about is blending leadership and partnership and focusing on bringing entrepreneurship to a government environment where it's not always that present, and making us more efficient and much more nimble and flexible, which is key these days, as you know.
Yeah, I think it's important for people that are currently leading e-commerce companies or want to understand that there are people and processes and things out there like what you're doing with the city of Westminster. And like you always ask yourself why. Well, the city of Westminster probably would love to have you doing business there. So
Yes.
having guys like Greg there to help bring increased success. And now here's the thing: is that's while you have a very unique title, there are a lot of people in a lot of cities. So you should really, like, wherever you're at, look out. Like, that's where you should start. And if you want to be a leader, like, we're going to talk about some of the traits and skills, but start by looking around and assessing what your resources are. Because if you feel that you're great at some stuff and not at others, I mean, that's part of what you're trying to help. That's a problem you're trying to solve, right?
Yeah, I think one of the first things I learned kind of midway in my career in leadership development is that the first step you need to do is take a real hard look at yourself. Do your own SWOT analysis and figure out where your own strengths and weaknesses are, and then turn those around into opportunities, and look at the resources that are out there to help you. You are spot on when you mention all the different people and free resources that are available to help entrepreneurs, especially in e-commerce. There are a wealth of them out there. And a good place to start is with your local municipality or your economic development groups. They're all there to help you. And especially now in these challenging times that we're living in, these folks are clamoring to help you and attract you, keep you solid, and open up resources that you may not have known before. And there are a lot of them out there.
Yeah, and so much of that too. I mean, look, this taxpayers. I mean, that's part of what we're paying for. This is economic development and job creation. And look, it's in your local municipality's best interest to have your business healthy and have it grow. It's just the way it goes. So I think a lot of leaders often do overlook those kind of things. And with that, I've made a list of, and we're going to be very e-commerce specific, but I think we'd be leaving out a lot if we didn't at least start with some basic things that are important traits and skills for any leader. And I think that starts with communication. We were talking about communicating with the community around you, but I mean, what are some of the communication points or tips that you've learned over the years, or why is that important for e-commerce leaders?
Well, I think in any industry that you're working on, but especially if you've got an e-commerce business and you are searching to get or looking to get your message out, I always start with the why. Why are you here? Why are you in business? Many people call that your mission statement. You can call it whatever you want, but you better be able to tell me your why in about 30 to 45 seconds, or express it in writing in a no more than a paragraph. And so when you're looking at communicating, start there with the very, very basic of the why, and then you branch off into sort of the more sophisticated marketing and branding development. And when you're looking at a marketing plan or trying to or communications plan broadly, you're trying to figure out who your target audiences are. From those target audiences, what are the key messages you want to use to reach those people, and then you get into the platforms and the different ways to reach them. And there are a myriad of new products and technology out there, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But first start with the very basic. Why are you here? Why are you around? Well, and it's not the what, it's not the how you do something. Simon Sinek has built a whole career on talking about this, but it really is important. What's in your heart, and why are you doing this? And what problem are you going to solve for me?
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue to the next item on my list, which is being aware. And that awareness begins with the communication, both with the people that you're working with, your ability to communicate with the people that might want to buy you and or buy from you, and also your communication with potential vendors or your supply chain. And this overall awareness is very difficult to have without having, like you meant, like this basic communication skills. The why part of it, if you can't define quickly and clearly to your own staff and those around you what the basic mission statement is. And by the way, I think a paragraph's too long. I tell people now, I'm like,
Yeah.
you have one
Right.
to two sentences.
Yeah, that's very
And the
true.
thing is if you can't communicate and be aware like of who you're serving in that concise of a statement or thought, then you might be overcomplicating it.
Indeed. It is all about brevity these days. It's all about simplicity, and being able to hone in on it. And it's not about, gosh, I think we want to move away from the PR speak and the marketing speak, and just be very clear and understandable. If your neighbor can't understand what you're doing, or your Aunt Sally can't understand it, or the stranger in the elevator, as we talk about elevator speeches and back in the day, can't understand it in a couple of sentences, as you mentioned, no one else is going to either, and nor are they going to take the time. Because as you know better than anybody, Matt, that there is so much competition out there right now. The noise is loud. It is not as simple as it used to be, especially in the e-commerce field, to stand out and stand above. So you got to hone in on it fast and quick, and understand what you're doing, and that begins with the awareness piece, absolutely. And it's also about having some, I think, sympathy and empathy at the same time, for what your customer is going through. And so, in process improvement, we start with data. We talk a lot about the human design process in Lean and Six Sigma trainings, but it is about design what you're building, your product, how you're going to communicate it from the customer's standpoint, not from your own. And then you'll have, I think, great success doing that.
Yeah, and then that leads to my next trait, which is problem solving. So yeah, I tell my own staff, the business that at Full Scale, the business I own and work at, that I can't solve a problem if I don't know it exists. And so that communication, that awareness leads to the problem solving that, and that's the thing is you have to remember, you're also not, as a leader, you're solving problems on many fronts. You're solving them for your business, you're solving them for your employees, and your product or service or whatever it is that you're selling, you're solving a problem there too. Because people buy things usually to solve problems or to fix something. And that could be as simple as I'm out of dish soap, but that's a problem that has a solution. So
Right.
and that's the same thing. Now, I'm going to roll right through that because we're going to talk about a lot of that in depth. And into the next thing I think is really important, because everything we just mentioned, if honesty and integrity are lacking, well, it's a problem. It's going to be a problem for your brand. It's going to be a problem for your reviews. It's going to be a problem for your overall presence. And it's really difficult long term for employees or people or vendors or anyone to buy in to the message that they're receiving from someone that lacks integrity. What are your comments on that?
Integrity is number one. I have not run across many people in my experience who have been able to have long-term success without beginning to and understanding and really embracing the importance of integrity and honesty and transparency in any kind of business dealing you're doing. You'll find in any kind of any kind of business these days, it's really all about partnerships and relationships. And if these are not mutually beneficial, and that all starts with trust and being able to be honest with each other and trustworthy, then it's not going to go very far. And your customers are going to be able to see through that pretty quickly in a lot of cases. And if they don't see through it quickly, they will eventually see through it. And you don't get a second chance in these kinds of things. There's so much competition and choice out there in the marketplace in many areas that people long to do business with people that they can sit across from the table from, have a cup of coffee with, just shoot the breeze like we're talking today, and know that I could, man, if at the end of the day here, I can trust you. I can shake your hand and understand that you're not going to do me wrong. You're going to do me right, and you've got my best interests at heart, and you're really committed to doing that.
And you just wrapped your arms right around the next item on my list was the value of relationships.
Oh, yeah.
And thank you, because you're making my job easy here today. I appreciate
Well,
that. Now with that, but relationships matter because if you want to sail that ship, any ship anywhere, you have to be able to have good relationships both, and that's back to that multi-front scenario. I mean, it's because it's with everyone you need to do business with. And if the relationships break down, then you have problems. Okay. Now, obviously, if we're going to discuss leadership skills for e-commerce teams, and once again, today's episode of Startup Hustle and part 4 of this series is sponsored by Clarinity. Scroll down to the show notes and give them a click. So, innovation, and I threw Clarinity out because they're an innovative company. They're doing things to solve problems in the e-commerce space. Now, innovation is key. Now, there's different ways to capture it, and we'll get into that in depth. But if you're 0% innovative, you might be in the wrong space if you're jumping into e-commerce. Or if you get that and you're just super strong at something else, like maybe product design and build, then that's when you reach out to companies like Clarinity or find the solutions you need in different spaces. So I love the fact that there are companies that are doing stuff to help those, because a lot of people are. I mean, there's probably like a builder or an inventor or a product someone. They're like, right. But this internet thing isn't mine. It's not what I'm good at. So, but as a leader in an e-commerce company, you need to either be innovative or quickly find people that are.
Exactly. And I would add, you know what, man, their innovation, a lot of times when people talk innovation, they go right to the technology piece, right? It's all about technology. And we've got to be in the best and brightest new software package or some sort of delivery package. And yes, technology is a big part of innovation, but it is also, going back to what we just talked about, it is the intersection of feasibility and desirability, and the sweet spot in between that is what your customer wants. Now, the folks at Clarinity understand that, and as you mentioned, they do a great job of helping support you figure that out. And also help you figure out the platforms that will help you get there and achieve that. But innovation is an art form and a science at the same time, and it's fun when you get the mojo going and you start brainstorming and you start thinking about things in a different way and you blue sky it. But I always say, look, before you jump into the innovation game, make sure you understand your data, who your customer is. What are the influencing factors in the marketplace or the community where you are and the space that you're playing in. Start with that, understand that, and then from there, the world is your oyster, so to speak. You can do a lot of different things once you get that foundational piece.
Yeah, and we're going to go into detail on the data and the strategy side later in this episode, so stick around. Now, one of the things, so 10 years ago, as actually in my over decade of experience with e-commerce and technology, one of the things that I didn't used to do well, that's my last basic trait before we get more specific, is delegation. And this is, as in any business. All right, first off, I want to clarify, if you don't ever think of Google or Amazon or any of these mega companies, they all had one employee at some point, and they were every business was a startup. The biggest businesses in the Apple was a startup. I mean, watch the movie, like they were in Woz's mom's garage or something, and that's just the way it goes. Now, with that, one of the things, and like back to where companies like Clarinity help a lot of early stage businesses, especially, is, well, look, all you can do is all you can do. And in an early business, if you're a solopreneur, you have a small shop, or you just don't have a lot of help, you have to really get your arms around what is the best value of your own time.
Yes.
And delegation is key here, because if you get too far away from this and you're not doing the things that are most important to your business is going to have a lot of problems. So some of that is that you mentioned, we go way back to just the beginning of this list, and that awareness and communication. It's about, like, what exactly are you good at? And what do you like doing? Like, okay, I can do accounting work. And I talked about this in the accounting episode. Like, I am technically trained and educated enough to do the basic parts of it, not the sophisticated side of it. But with that, I hate it. It's not, and it's also not the best. It's not the best thing I can be doing for my business. Now, at the same time, you got to pay attention to it. So yeah, that delegation piece. Do you have any comments on that? Most people usually do.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm much better at it today than I was. But in fact, I was just having a conversation with a colleague the other day. I part of my challenge is I'm impatient. Let's go. Let's rock and roll, people. And I know what I want to get done. And so I can usually do it 10 times faster, because I don't have to explain it. But what I have learned is, I need to do that self-inventory like you just mentioned, and understand what my strengths and weaknesses are, understand where my sweet spot is, understand what's going to sap the energy out of me by the end of the day if I have to do it. If it's accounting, which it is for me as well, or if it's doing HR stuff, which, oh my God, if I have to do HR stuff, I'm toast. Find complementary resources who can help you do that. And there's a lot of options out there who can help you do that. And once you know your inner strengths and what you can focus on, let's go back now to the kind of the strategic planning of leadership. It's understanding what those wildly important goals are, the wigs in your life, the big wigs, prioritizing those as you mentioned. What is your highest and best use and your highest calling? And then let the whirlwind of your day just move aside. I'm constantly surprised in the role that I have now, how easy it is for me to get sidetracked or get bumped off the track of where I know I need to spend most of my day, answering emails or responding to a resident's concern about water bills, for example, or anything of that nature. But if I need to focus on I do need to focus on the biggest, highest priority and move towards that wildly important goal. Because cumulatively every day, if you get sidetracked, you get sucked into the weeds, you're not focusing on the big picture stuff, you're not going to go anywhere. And you're going to wake up at the end of the day, the end of the week, or the end of the month, and you go, well, what the hell happened? Excuse me, what happened? What's going on here? And when you're a solopreneur or an entrepreneur, you can't point the finger anywhere else, right? It is solely your responsibility to get that and embrace it and lean into it.
Yeah, and that's, once again, that's where companies like this episode sponsored, Clear Entity, help businesses. So, I mean, look, reach out, talk to people, figure out what the best options are and where you can get help. And once again, all you can do is all you can do. Now, I felt that if we didn't cover some basics of leadership now, look, those are good. Those are good for any business.
Yes.
Definitely good for e-commerce. At the same time, now we're going to get a lot more specific. So I've separated 4 categories that are more specific here, and I'm gonna lay out what those are, and then we'll go back to the first one on the list, and we'll be a little more detailed. So I think as a leader in e-commerce, the familiarity with technology is important. Now, you also need to be familiar with marketing, especially digital. You need to be data-driven and strategic based on that data. And you also have to gain some kind of grasp on operations and project management. Now, we're going to go back to the top of the list and first start with technology. Now, look, I am a non-technical founder. A decade later, I have a very strong grasp on technology. I can sit down and talk to CTOs and lead developers and stuff like that, but I don't practice the arts. I tell people I don't write code, I write checks. Both are important parts of the process,
but yes, they are.
But with that, you have to have, if you're going to lead an e-commerce company, look, I didn't know anything about any of this stuff until I started doing it. And at the times when I don't get it, I don't understand, I Google it. Or look it up on YouTube. Like, guys, Professor Google is your guide on so many of these things. But if you don't have a basic understanding of tech in general, you need to, because e-commerce is a tech space. You're going to be utilizing technology. And if you just refuse to put your arms around it, or you can't or won't, it's going to be problematic. What's your input, Greg?
I remember back, you and I were talking earlier, Matt, and you started e-commerce right at kind of the beginning of the whole industry, right? When I had my science toy company as an entrepreneur, we kind of ventured into a website e-commerce, but just kind of by accident, and hired a company, paid them $2,500. We had designed our website, but we didn't know anything about the back end or fulfillment and any of that nature of payment systems and processes and how to make them all talk to each other. It was the best $2,500 we've ever invested. We saw our sales quadruple over 6 months, and we're like, what is this? This is like, the slot machine in Vegas, and you just pull and it comes out money. It's just amazing. I learned that was my first signal that if I didn't understand technology, whether or not I'm in e-commerce or whatever I'm doing in life, you have got to understand technology. And there is no excuse for not understanding the basics and moving beyond the basics. You can do that, as you just mentioned, with tons of online resources. If you can turn on a computer, you can figure it out. It doesn't take a master's doctorate degree to figure out a lot of the technology that's on the market today. It is built to be simple. It is built for you to understand it. And it's a lot of times plug and play, as you know. There are certainly nuances to everything and certain technologies that will work better than others for certain industries and people and product. But that's where your network comes in, and that's where people come in. Because if I know I can call Matt, who can help me and connect with me, or Clarinity, or whoever it might be, that's the key to success there. But don't use the excuse. I hear it all the time. Well, I'm just not good at technology. Or I just, I don't want to do that. I'll just find somebody and hire them to do that. Well, you can hire somebody, but you better know what you're doing, because you can lose and waste a lot of money in the process if you don't have the basic understanding of it. So that's what I would say.
I think one of the mistakes people make is they just call up one person they know that's a quote tech person.
Yeah.
And they get one tiny bit of input, and then that's it. And that's what they want to do. And I know that because obviously I'm in the business I'm in the tech space, and I talk to people. I'm like, how did you arrive at the decision to use X technology? They're like, well, and whenever a response starts with that timbre and tone,
Right.
you're going to get something, and it's almost invariably, well, I called my wife's second cousin's brother because I heard he was a tech guy, and he said that we should use this, and this. And the thing is often that kind of advice leads to using things that like there's not. You get one set of input, and that doesn't mean it's law. And I see a lot of people that have put a ton of money into technology that is very difficult to support.
Yes.
And that's the main thing. It's usually when I hear it's because they're trying to find some kind of developer or help or something that is just very difficult to locate because they use something weird and obscure. Yeah. Oftentimes they have tried to build rather than buy. And if you're resource strapped or timeline strapped in the beginning, that's not the best approach. Now, next on the list, if here with the familiarity to technology, and this is clearly very connected to what we were just talking about. I believe the understanding the importance of the user experience is key. It is key. It is about understand, and especially in a mobile world, and e-commerce is so mobile and mobile device driven. And here's the thing: is a frustrated or confused mind almost always says no. Right. And if you make it a pain in the butt to buy from you, then you're not going to sell a whole lot of stuff. And I think that, so much of that is you mentioned like e-commerce of the days of old. Like, do you remember like a 14-step process? And like, why do you need a strand of my DNA to sell me some soap? And, right. It's like, you want to confirm my email address? Like it's all these different things. And so much of of that is, you look at a company like Amazon, which sells a lot of stuff online, and what the reason for that is they made it very fast and easy for you to buy.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Don't give me a chance to say no, right? You said the DNA strands. We had when I thought back the other day as I was thinking about doing this interview, I thought, well, how our first process from logging on to purchasing was 15 clicks. 15 clicks. And how on earth we ever made any money doing that, I have no clue. By the time we were down to 4 clicks, but that's still too much, as you know, in this day and age. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, this human-centered design approach that I really, really believe in. And, I've had the opportunity to get my black belt in Lean and Six Sigma process improvement. And all of this is very ingrained in what we teach and what we do in that area. But you got to walk people through the process. You first have to go through the process. You have to understand through the mind of your customer what it is that they do and how they do it, and all the different on-ramps and off-ramps that they may have. And then you got to test it, right? I think a lot of times that's a step we miss. And we just jump from, well, okay, I mapped it all out. I've got it all, I think, figured out. And then we just go for it. But if you can pilot it and do a test with, half dozen people or so and see what works, what doesn't work, you're always going to need to make some tweaks as a result of that. And always this continuous, constant improvement is really important too. But you hit it right on the head there. It's not about you. I don't care about you. I care about my customer and what it is they have to go through in order to buy something that I'm providing them. And a great solution, I hope.
Yeah, and I mean, you nailed it there. And the thing is, there's one word in there: testing. Look, half of America's sitting there with an iPhone in their pocket. Testing your product or your software does not mean just using your phone. Like you got to get in there. Like, what's the experience like on a phone, on an Android phone, on an iPad, on a tablet? What happens if, and those things are all important. Remember, the more obstacles or steps you put between a buyer and a cash register, the less likely you are to sell something. And that is a key ingredient. Now, with the familiarity to technology being important for e-commerce leadership. And once again, this episode is brought to you by Clarinity, and that's spelled CLEARINITY.com. I had to think there for a second. Gosh forbid I have to think about anything. But okay, so, and I brought that up because as a leader, you need to have a willingness to consider and implement new technology. As I mentioned, Clarinity, because that's actually what they do. So when I say willing to consider and implement, you're always looking for the next best thing. Like, what can I do to make this better, faster, cheaper, somehow, somewhere? And this isn't just about your e-commerce site or business. It's about the whole business. And so many companies are, getting down to like, okay, well, that makes a worker in the warehouse take 10 extra steps every time. Oh, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Okay, well, how about when we have 2,500 orders?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden it's a lot. And, when you talk to, and the next part of that, I'll just jump right in, is also seeking automation and, any type of business process improvement. I got to feel like that's something that your position in the city of Westminster is probably pretty adamant about on some days.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, let's just use the old driver's license renewal story, right? So how many steps and people and phone numbers and websites do you have to go to before you renew an electronic identification card? And why does it take, an hour and a half of my life? And then in some cases, I may have to come back the next day because I forgot an important piece of information. So again, in the government, we're famous for not thinking about that. But you as an entrepreneur, you in the e-commerce business or whatever industry it might be, that's what's going to, in many cases, that's what's going to separate you from your competitor, is how efficient you are and how efficient you make my life as a result of that. Now, when you're looking at the leadership and the operations kind of project management side of your business, whatever that might be, everything adds up. And it is sometimes the unintended consequences of, we implemented a verification code, right? We put that in there just to make sure that people, the whole order is a much more safe kind of transaction. Well, maybe that's important. I don't know. But if it's not, don't add another step for me. Because if you add another step for me that's going to take, 25, 30 seconds, I'm probably going to go somewhere else. But imagine if I'm one of your employees or your staff who is now having to do that same kind of thing. And I always encourage people as part of the innovation process, talk to the people who are doing the work. So let's assume now you've got maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 staff members. They know the answers. They're in it. They can help you. Make sure you're talking to them to find out what they would do more efficiently. And many times that's where your answers come from. We just did an
I have a rule one. I have a rule one with this. Rule one is this annoying?
Is this annoying?
And if the answer is yes, then you need to go back to the drawing board. And that applies to your visitors, your buyers, your employees, all of it. Because much like you mentioned, something simple like, it could be as simple as like a page navigation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Now if someone has to do that 100 times a day,
mm-hmm.
I would hate that by the end of the day. And then think about that. You're like, but it only takes 3 seconds. Yeah, well, times 300 times 220 work days in a year. And all of a sudden, like, you're the one, as a business owner, you're the one paying for that too, for that person to sit there. And then on top of it, it's like, it's just kind of a general, like, I don't know, if you can't get past rule one, then you got problems.
You got a problem, right?
Yep.
Amen to that.
So are you ready to talk about selling stuff? Because I love talking about selling stuff.
Yeah, so let's sell some stuff. Yeah. Sure.
I like that. So, we mentioned we had a couple different things, because by the way, this whole subject, I could probably have another 4-part series within a 4-part series, just about today's topic. But the modern e-commerce leader and the ones that'll be successful in the future definitely have a grasp in the marketing space and understand some of that, and especially the digital world, because look, your e-commerce sales are not going to be driven by your newspaper advertising. They could be a little bit, but the number one rule of marketing is you got to put it in the places where your buyers are and where they're going to be. I mean, this is why Google is Google, because people search for stuff and they find, and then there you are, you're ready to buy. So when it comes to familiarization with marketing and digital, I mean, you're going to have to start with just a basic knowledge of digital marketing and social media.
Yes. If you're in this space and you don't understand that, you probably should reconsider whether or not you want to be in the space right now and take a step back. I don't mean to be rude about that, but just take a step back.
Well, it's okay to be. Yeah, be honest and be upfront. I mean, because if you're just like, okay, if you want to be an e-commerce business and you are one of those people that are like the last people in the world that don't have a Facebook account,
yes,
you got to ask yourself why. Like, because I mean, I don't care if you like Facebook and what they do. They're 75% of the country's in there every day.
Yeah.
And that's where you reach people. That's how you get a hold of them. And, and it's the same thing. Like, look, I'm not a huge Instagram person, but I am at the same time, because I realize that's where people are and that's where they're looking at stuff. And, just that having a basic, you don't have to like it. You don't have to love it. You don't have to be someone who's posting 50 times a day personally, but you got to have a basic understanding of it.
Absolutely. And there's no excuse for not having that basic understanding now. And understanding which platform is best for your product is going to be key as well. There are so many different platforms out there now, and you can, shotgun approach it and probably have some success. But, that very targeted approach in the platform that you're going to use the most, I think, is also pretty important. And realizing that it, with Facebook, for example, and other social media platforms, it doesn't take a lot of money to do some tests in marketing, and make sure you're testing out A and Bs and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. Again, listening to that audience component of it. But to your point of this digital marketing, it does also go to the basics too. First, before you get into that, you got to know who you are and who your customer is and why you're going after them. And then understand when you're going after a specific target market, social media these days provides you some amazing tools. It's almost a little scary at times when you think about all the data they're collecting on all of us. But as a marketer, that's really valuable stuff and will save you thousands of dollars and lots of headaches. And you can just cut right to it to get to the person, as you said, who wants to hear your message. We do that in basic communications now at the government level. And what we're able to do to send messages down to the neighborhood, down to some cases the block, is pretty fascinating. And we also listen to our customers using these platforms as well. There are trends out there. As you know, it's SEO. It's very important to know what the topic and the trend is, and what are the keywords that are being tossed out there right now. Every day, you know better than I do, man. I'm not an expert in this by any means, but it is. I get pretty geeked out when I look at the data that you can get from the platforms these days, and how that can help you in many ways.
Well, and that, the understanding that Greg is talking about there is being able to clearly define and understand your own brand message, who that's going to resonate with, and and defining that target audience. Now, I think one of the things all right, so when I as the founder of gigabook.com, I was at first very excited. I was like, man, anybody could use this. And then I quickly realized that was a detriment and not a great thing, because oh, wow, everyone could use this. Who am I going to advertise to? How do we segment that down? What do we go for? And, and we mentioned at the top of this episode that you have to have a basic understanding of what your business does and your brand messaging and how you want to portray your brand to the world. And that has so much to do with digital marketing. Now, we're not going to get into deep specifics here, but look, simpler is better these days. We also mentioned that earlier. So many of you that are listening to this show probably found Startup Hustle off of an ad in social media that simply said, a podcast for entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. That is exactly what Startup Hustle is, a podcast for entrepreneurs, and it's by entrepreneurs. So, that said, that's all the brand message that we need. And too many people want to clutter it up. They want to say too much. When it comes to your brand messaging and your digital advertising, your goal, the purpose of that is not to tell the viewer or the visitor, you want them to become a visitor. You want to drive them to something else where, you got my attention, tell me more. So that's one of the mistakes so many people make, is they're just trying to say too much. So my book editor loves to use the phrase, lead with the need. And that is a good place to start. So what's the need? What's the solution you're solving? I had talked to someone the other day about this, and it was a jobs platform. He said, well, what should my brand message be? I said, what are you guys trying to do? We're trying to solve the problem that people hate interviews. Okay, you should just literally say interviewing sucks.
Exactly.
Because it sucks both for the employer and the potential employee. And the thing is that was a brand message that would get your attention and would capture both the buyer and the seller there. So, yeah. Now, one of the things, and the next on the list, that can be remarkably helpful in this category is you mentioned earlier, data-driven. You can collect so much, and the modern e-commerce leader and the most effective people, they understand the data, and they're able to create a strategy, a growth strategy, maybe a go-to-market strategy, any type of strategy related to that.
Yes, and I would say the cautionary tale of data is don't fall so much in love with your story, whatever you think your story is, that you ignore what the data may tell you. The data may come back and tell you that your story, I'm using air quotes around that, really sucks. And it's got no chance in hell of selling in the marketplace. Well, you need to probably listen to that and pivot and shift a little bit to something different. But yeah, boy, I can't tell you how much data I go through on a daily basis before I make any kind of decisions. And when I was an entrepreneur, I did the same thing. It was really, really critical. And when we were looking at trying, our company's motto and vision at the time was making kids smarter. And we had variations of that. Smart kids, not harder. It was really simple. We were selling products, not to the kids, though. We were selling them to the parents, because we found very early on that the data told us that parents of pre-K through fourth graders make purchases in the science-related category to make their kids smarter, and they don't want to spend more than $14 to $15 doing it, and they want at least the feeling and the perception that because little Johnny or Sally are using that product, they have a greater chance of getting into Harvard or Yale and becoming an engineer of some sort, right? And so, but the data we kept focus grouping and surveying and looking at where the trends were in sales. It helped us tremendously. We didn't always get it right, but we always were. We weren't so in love with our story that we weren't afraid to change or shift based on what we were learning.
Yeah, and so when it comes to being data driven and the strategy that comes with it, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of these platforms that are out there, they just simply make it really easy for you to figure a lot of that out. Yeah. And that's a key ingredient. Data will help you spot trends, as you mentioned. You can obtain valuable insights. One of the things that we're flawed at when it comes to just being human is bias. And like you mentioned, don't fall in love with your own stuff to the point that you ignore the data, because really, in the end, it's X's and O's. And with that, part of what's really important about a data-driven strategy, so if you're an e-commerce business, it is going to become very X's and O's to you. It'll become very clear that spending X amount of money equals X amount of sales, and that's either going to add up or it's not. And no level of bias or wanting it to or hoping, and hope is not a strategy, people are going to help you grow any part of your business around that. So, being able to track sales, and I have that, here is that's an important part. Now, Google and a zillion other places have tags and stuff you can follow. Now, once again, back to getting some help. That's what companies like Clarinity do. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, look, you don't have to learn 100% of this. Like, reach out and get some help from some people, because these kind of tracking things are imperative to being able to do things like predict revenue and have some understanding of your supply chain. And, I want to give you a chance to have a couple comments on that before we move into the final part of this episode related to operations and project management.
Yeah, are you talking about data or the or supply chain?
Well, just the general ability to track sales and predict revenue, and we're talking about trends and insights, but I mean, I don't like to just say, hey, this is what you should do with that. Well, I don't like to mention features without the benefits.
Right. Well, I think once you are in the sales game, and once you are watching a new set of data come in, and that's where the data you need to pay attention to is where your customers are landing as far as buying more of your product, and what products are the most popular, and what are all the components that go into those products in particular. So I will harken back to my own experience in e-commerce. We had a lot of our products actually came from overseas, from China. They were manufactured in the Shenzhen province. And Hong Kong, so they were FOB Hong Kong. We had a 6-month lead time on anything. Add another 3 or 4 months onto development, R&D, and product design, and then approval. And then once it was on the boat, you're looking at least 45 days to landing. So if we weren't backing up and had an operational plan in place that took that inventory data and inventory control, really clearly understanding what we needed and projecting out when it was we would have higher demand, we would have been toast. And we actually I would say there was probably one or two times that we nearly had to shut the doors because we didn't do a very good job of planning that and planning far enough ahead. And especially planning far enough ahead on the capital that we would need to invest in that inventory that we'd have to have. So there's just-in-time inventory, and that's awesome. But it's not always just-in-time money in the bank to make sure you've got the inventory. So you have to work with your bankers as well to make sure you've got the lines of credit and the cash flow coming in to support all of that. It sounds daunting and overwhelming, I know, but once you get into the habit of doing that, it's not that bad. And again, there are people out there who can help you do it.
Yeah, and I spent so much time talking to entrepreneurs and businesses that are at different stages and sizes, and one of the things is early entrepreneurs and founders often want to try to just focus on what's going to happen if the sky is falling.
Yeah.
What happens if things go well? What happens if things go right? What happens if it blows up and you're in a good way? And handling your business's growth, and that's as we get into the last section of this episode, I do want to again remind everyone listening that today's episode and the fourth part of this series is brought to you by Clear Entity, and they can help you get a handle on your company's growth. And that's really important. And I've seen this occur firsthand in a case where business had grown very quickly, and I actually worked to go in and fix the problems. And so many of those were related to the last part of what we're going to talk about today, which, look, I'm going to be honest, a lot of people, especially those you mentioned earlier, you're like, hey, I'm kind of impatient. That means you're probably a great salesperson on some level, because you probably ask for the sale and you're like, hey, do you want to buy it? And
right.
That's so your strength is sometimes your weakness and vice versa. But that said, many entrepreneurs are that type A driven personality style, and that means that we're often disorganized, and we're so busy selling stuff that we don't take enough time to figure out the operations and the project management side of it. You mentioned earlier that supply chain. We'll talk about that, but if you want to be a leader in e-commerce, look, I mentioned saving money is making money. You might not be efficient on day one, but you got to continue to move towards it, because if you're going to scale up, that leak in the boat turns into water pouring in.
Yes.
And it can sink you in a lot of categories. We talked about relationships. Your relationship with your clients, your buyers, and even your own employees is going to become hazardous if your operations and project management, and so much of that begins with how you handle and maintain your inventory. Now, we did do a specific episode about this, and it's that important. So go back to the episode named Organizing Your E-commerce Inventory, because look, it's easy to organize your inventory when you don't have much of it. But if it grows, and there's a lot of things that can happen to your inventory. We talked about some of that in episode 3 of this series, is like everything from shrink to loss to returns to all of it, and it starts piling up. Yes. But if you can't handle it, it's a problem. Now, and with that, you got to be able to identify and address bottlenecks. And that's like a very typical problem when it comes to operations in e-commerce businesses, especially as they grow quickly. And that relationship, you talk about that supply chain. Well, if something has to come in from Guangzhou, China, or wherever. And here's the thing, it's not always that simple too, because sometimes it sits at customs and you can't make those people work faster. So I'm going to give you another chance to expand on your earlier statements related to that, because I feel like you may have really experienced that in a way that our listeners might not want to.
Okay, you are absolutely correct. So when we started this online e-commerce business, we're a catalog company selling about $150,000 a year. Really good money at the time, and a good solid market, easy to kind of fulfill, not a lot of concern about inventory. Within 8 months of moving into some different arenas, we had grown to an almost $3.5–4 million a year company, with contracts with Walmart, Target, Toys R Us, Hobby Lobbies, We were on the home shopping network. We had a product that we sold at Christmas time on the home shopping network, fake snow, which was really cool stuff. But here's what happened. We were swimming in the POs, right? The purchase order is coming in, and this is the best thing since sliced bread. And we weren't paying attention to the long-term horizon about what that kind of growth curve, which was off the charts growth, could do to cash flow, could do to customer relationships, employee relationships, vendor relationships, financial relationships. We needed cash immediately to fund these purchase orders and to get the orders going in China. We had luckily made some really good choices on factories and manufacturers overseas, and it is slow. It is so slow you can't even imagine. I was smiling when you were talking about customs. The simplest little things would get hung up from something going from Hong Kong to Shenzhen for component assembly, and then coming back, they get hung up again, and you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And that 2-week delay was like could kill us. So if you don't pay attention to that, you will grow yourself to death. And I've seen it happen many, many times when signing large contracts with large retailers who have, by the way, fulfillment books, as thick as 4 or 5 of your biggest books you've ever read, and they're designed to penalize you for not following everything to the letter of the law. Well, you may not want that. And when you've got a net 60 with a $1 billion retailer, and you're just a little guy at in Denver, Colorado, come on, man, pay me my money. But they won't. And you have to weigh all of those factors and pay really close attention to the details, because that's where you could fall down really, really quickly. You've worked so hard to make it in the big leagues, right? And to break through and to get all this revenue coming through. But it's the details of growth that really present to you, in many cases, the greatest threat. That's been my experience. And trust me, it kept me up many, many nights. You can't see me, but I'm a very thin-haired, middle-aged man, and I used to have hair down on my shoulders, and it was because of fulfillment. Man, if I don't hit that fulfillment mark with Toys R Us, they're going to fine us, all this other stuff. So just pay close attention to it. You will save your business, you'll save your marriage and your life and everything else, a whole lot of stress.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that became very evident with the COVID-19 stuff, was how fragile certain elements of our own supply, or the American and international supply chain, are. And so it's a lot, and any disruption in it causes a weird trickle-down effect. I was talking to Chris Kovac of Riverwatch Beef, who's been on the show before, and he told me he had to because I was ordering some beef jerky, and I love what they make, but he told me they had to change the recipe. He's like, I know you love the jerky, but I had to change the recipe. I said, why? Well, he wasn't able to get a certain type of salt in from Italy. Wow. I'm just weird stuff. And, it's like toilet paper was a big thing. It wasn't that we can't make toilet paper. That's just something that's so predictable from an inventory standpoint that when the demand flexes up even slightly, it clears out, and here's the thing, is because they really are that accurate at knowing how much toilet paper people normally need, and they make exactly that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, certain things and the customs. So I used to work for Roland, and Roland's the world's largest maker of electronic musical instruments. And, a lot of that is made overseas and brought here. And I've had, you talk about, well, you made fake snow. If you don't deliver fake snow before Christmas, you're going to sit on your fake snow until the next Christmas.
Yes,
well, so much of that, you look at seasonality of stuff, and that was always a challenge for us, because, we'd be able to know that it was going to arrive at the dock on a certain date, but we couldn't necessarily tell you. And then there's weird things you can't control either, like the crane that picks it up dropped it, or just weird stuff that you don't know about.
Or a trucker strike. We went through a trucking strike.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's something else you mentioned, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of, but the being fined by your buyer is a real thing. And the COO of Full Scale, Daryl Blackburn, when he first started working with us, his parents owned a transportation and trucking company. I became very familiar with it because I would see how stressed they would get. Because if they didn't deliver, they were primarily delivering vehicle parts to Ford. And here's the thing is that if they have to shut down the assembly line because you're late, that's real expensive and they're going to send you a bill for it.
Yes,
So
they are.
there's a lot that goes in there. And now I do want to guide you to go back to episode 2 and learn about some of the accounting stuff that's related to the e-commerce businesses, because e-commerce businesses more than any need to be able to balance the funding and the finance and have a true idea of what the life cycle of their cash is, because the bigger arena that you want to play in, probably the slower you're going to get paid. And if you can't manage that, it's a real problem. Now, one of the things everything we just described can create bottlenecks, but just general bottlenecks. You may have all the inventory you want, but you bottleneck at something dumb like the shipping label printing station or something like that. And I think it's real. If you need help, companies like Clarinity will write standard operating procedures for you. And then on the most basic level, just watch your own business and see where things are piling up. I think you are of a sufficient age to probably have seen the I Love Lucy candy factory.
Right.
And it's like coming down the line, and at first she's boxing it up and it's going well. Then she gets distracted. Then it goes faster. And next thing you know, it's just piling up to the point, and she's shoving candy and cake in her mouth and her shirt and everything, just trying to keep up. And that's become a very iconic video for many people, because that can happen as well. And look, these things don't go away until you address them. It is usually something that is fixed fairly easily with a little bit of thought. But with that, while you're not, as a leader, you definitely should not be doing things to make bottlenecks worse.
Right.
If you already know that it's there, that then turning your marketing campaign to sell something, I don't know, you get it. There's a lot of stuff you can go through. Now, when it comes to SOP or standard operating procedures, and this is the last note on the list before we'll close out this episode, but what do you look? No one wakes up. Well, I know a few people that do, but honestly, I ask them how. But no one wakes up and goes, you know what? I'm going to spend my day to day with a huge smile on my face, creating standard operating procedures because I love SOPs.
Right.
Like said very few, if anyone ever. But that kind of stuff is important, because if you start to grow quickly and you don't have them, you're going to stop everything you're doing to then create them.
You know what, man? And I hate SOPs too. I especially hate them in my current role, but they are very, very important. And so I will tell you a couple little secrets. One, there are many online resources that can help people develop these, and there are forums and formats and processes to help you with processes. But I also have partnered up with our local university, and they have a Master's of Project Management system that they offer. So we are lucky. We've got 3 or 4 major universities within walking distance of our city. And so I, as an entrepreneur, had also developed partnerships with them. And these students were able to do a master's level project to help me develop some SOPs that I would have never been able to, or would have taken me 10 times longer. But I found that it was so critical and so beneficial, and it'll save you a lot of headaches and pain in the long run.
Yeah, and so much of that is about, look, if the people that work at your business, and I mentioned earlier what happens if things go right, if all of a sudden you got to bring in extra help and scale up and you don't have these things, then you're going to be mad that you didn't create them. You really will, because another thing too is, like, people largely just want to know what they need to do to get the job done. And these things are just simple clarifiers. Now, if you've listened to the show for a while, you have the whole process of business. You heard me talk about the process of business growth being excruciating on many days. And these kind of simple, be brilliant on the basic things are key to survival. You can, like you use the phrase, grow yourself out. We're growing out of business, people, and that's not a compliment for your business. But put your arms around some of this stuff. You got to think of it a little bit in advance, and that's what a good leader does. A good leader, I meant to mention just a moment ago that startups don't come with an owner's manual. So you got to create one, and if you're not ready to do that, then go open a Subway franchise, because it does come with an owner's manual, and that's what a franchise is. It's a proven business with an owner's manual. So some of this stuff, and look, this doesn't have to be a bound book that it comes with a fancy cover and things like that. I mean, I've been in so many places that run and operate efficiently because they just have a simple document. It might be taped to the wall of the warehouse, not even straight, like crooked, you get it, picture it, but it's there and it exists. And and now the thing is don't be afraid to improve it or adjust it. Let's go back to that communication step and say, listen to the people. You're not a good leader if the people that execute the plan are telling you that the plan is wrong and has problems, and you're like, no, but that's the plan. No, it's your job to listen. That's what leaders do. All right, so we end episodes of Startup Hustle with what we call the Founders Freestyle. Since this is a specific 3-part series, we'll just call it the Startup Hustle Freestyle. In conclusion for today's episode, what are a couple things that you feel most adamantly about, or what are the key points that you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the bottom line I walk away with today is understanding that it is about the basics, and it is about checking the ego at the door, and admitting when you may need some help and some support from the many resources that want to help and support you. And the third thing is that I really hope people walk away with is that you got this. You can do this. It is not brain surgery. If it was, I would be telling you much differently. You can't Google brain surgery, but you can make this happen. Take some risk, be innovative, get out there and do it, and never lose that North Star where you're headed. And you'll be very successful.
Yeah, and before I sum this up, once again, today's episode of Startup Hustle is sponsored by Clarinity. Scroll down to the show notes, click a link. Don't be afraid to reach out for help. I think that's great. I think that's great advice, Greg. And that's what today's sponsor helps with. You mentioned earlier that in a past situation, you spent $2,500 and saw an immediate return from all that. Sometimes it's that straightforward. Sometimes it's not. I think as I've grown as an entrepreneur, the thing that that has a priceless value is peace of mind. And if you want to learn all the crap the hard way, okay. But I look back at my own history and I'm like, God, if I just would have maybe spent a couple bucks and talk to someone. And people, they'll be like, I don't want to call my lawyer. He makes $500. He charges me $500 an hour. You're not paying for that hour. You're paying for that technically, but you're paying that rate because of all the experience, input, and all of that person has acquired prior to that. And that's what you pay for with companies that want to help improve your SOPs, or even just listening to shows like this podcast. If you are still we're in this golden age of information, and 15 years ago, a conversation like this would have been a book on tape that you had to pay $12.99 for or something, and it's everywhere. So go out and try to find solutions. Assume that they exist and you can find them, because I'm shocked if you can't, because there's a lot of people out there doing a lot of innovative things. There's a lot of people with a lot of experience, and there's a lot of stuff out there to help you. Now, once again, this was a 4-part series. This was episode 4. Go back. The links to the other episodes, they're in the show notes. Go back and check them out. If you started at step 4, go back and check the other stuff out. We're trying to do a better job here at Startup Hustle of creating some content that works well with itself. Either that, or we're just going to do 6-hour episodes, which I think might be a different kind of problem, mainly for my voice. But Greg, I want to appreciate you. I say that I appreciate your time, your input, your experience, and what you guys are doing. So I figured out a lot of stuff I need to get back to doing. So I'll see you next time.
Matt, thanks so much. Best to everybody.